Hi juniors, welcome to the last practice video that you'll be watching. This is the functions practice video. You can find this here in the functions module. For this video, you can follow along with the function outline, and then after that, you can submit the outline once you've completed it, and then do the drills and debug. For now, let's go straight to PyCharm. Now for functions, you usually have them at the beginning of your code, because when you have top-down processing, if you're to refer back to the function and it's not been defined yet, it's not going to know what to call. So that's what we'll start with. We'll start off with what a function has for syntax. That starts with the def, which is def, define, and then you're going to have your name of the function. And then this is going to actually follow camel casing. So if we use camel casing, we will capitalize that, and then capitalize the F, but not the first word. Standard things for variables, you'll do the same thing for function names. And then after that is the parameter. These are the things you are putting into your function, and if that doesn't make sense, that's fine, we can explain later. And then we have the colon. Once that first line is down, if you were to enter it in, it would also be tabbed in. Just like loops, you have that tabbed in part to the syntax, except these work a little bit different than loops, because once you're in here, it's going to have all of the code that you want. So we'll just write in code. This is all the code that you want to reference whenever you call on that function. And then after that, you will have return. Now, with the return, it's going to close the function, and you have to have the return at the end. You can have variables or data at the end of the return, so we'll put variable, but you don't have to. Regardless, you have to have the return, and if you want, you can have the variable and data. And we'll see what that looks like later. So let's start with an example function. This can look like define sum to num. Now, I'm naming it very specifically. If I were to call back on this function, I understand what it looks like based off the name. And while doing this, we can also put in a comment on what this code is doing. So let's just say taking two numbers, adding them, and printing them. So this is very clear what it's looking at. So if I were to go back to my function, I understand what it's doing. I'm also taking the parameters, so it's including the two numbers, which is what we'll talk about here. These are the parameters. We'll put this in a parenthesis. We'll go num1, you're creating that first variable, then num2, this is the next variable, and then our colon. Whenever you call upon the function, you have to have those two parameters, num1 and num2. And again, we'll see what this looks like once we finish the code. Once I enter it in, it tabs it in. Then I'm going to put answer is set to num1 plus num2. Now, as you can see, we're using the mathematical operator for addition. So these, when you put in for the function, these should be integers. And then it's going to return print answer. And so if we were to run through this, it's going to take our parameters, it's going to add them and store them in the variable answer, and it's going to print our answer. Now, let's actually call upon this code. We do this by calling upon the name of our function, which is sum to num. Then we're going to input our parameters. This can be 2, 3. This is the same parameters we had before. So what it's going to do is going to take num1 and see that this is in the slot for that. So it's going to set that to 2, and it's going to do the same thing for number 2. It'll set that to the integer 3. Now, if I were to just run this code, it'll print out 5, because what it's doing is it's running all of this and then printing our answer. Now, let's say if I didn't have this print here and I just returned answer, nothing's going to happen. What if I print my function right here? It's going to print out 5. That's because this right here is being represented as the value 5 once it runs through the function. So I can actually set a new variable to this function and then print that variable. And it'll print out 5. Now functions are really useful. Because if you ever want to call back on a line of code, but you don't want to write it all out, for example, if I want to add these two numbers, I don't have to write those out. I can just call upon the function. But for now, let's fix this, and then let's head on to the next example. This next example uses lists. So let's start with define shopping list, and our parameter will be, let's say, Walmart. And then I make sure I put that colon there for the proper syntax. And what I want this to do is take the list and print everything out in the list. So let's make that comment there. Taking a list with the variable Walmart and printing everything in that list. Again, this is very useful because if I ever call back on this function or I look back at the top of my code, I can see it and understand it with this comment right here. I don't actually have to look through the code and try to dissect what it means. I have it right here. So let's enter in, make sure it's tabbed. I'm going to write 4x in Walmart. Again, this is another one of those loops that you guys learned. I'm going to put in my colon here because this is the proper syntax for loops. I'm going to enter print x. So then we will return that. Now let's actually create our list. We'll just call this fruit, and then we will set that to this list. I'm going to type out real quick. And then once we have that typed out, we will actually run shopping list. And then for my parameter, I'm going to put fruit, and it's going to take this fruit list, put it in here. And so for x in Walmart, print x. And so it's taking the fruit and setting it as the Walmart and using it for that. So let's run this. And now it prints banana, orange, apple. I can use functions to call back onto that code later. And so I don't have to use the same piece of code over and over again. I can just call back on that very specific function. One, it looks very nice in your code to not have very jumbled code. And two, it also prevents less errors that happen whenever you're creating code. Because if you're typing the same thing over and over again, you might have a more chance for error. But if you have one piece of perfect code and you call back to it, you can trust that it's going to work. Now, speaking of errors, we can go through syntax errors right now. For example, if you misspell something, you can shop in list, or sometimes you can miss the parentheses. That will give you an error. You can forget the colon in here. That will definitely give you an error. Make sure you don't forget that. And you can also forget the block in. This should be tabbed in. Okay, for example, if I run this, it's going to give me an error. Expected intended block. Once I do that, code runs great. That pretty much wraps up functions. If you have any questions, feel free to send an email or just attend student hours. Otherwise, I hope you have a great rest of your day.